It is 05:14 on the morning of March 9th, 2026. A drainage ditch south of Kreminna, Luhansk Oblast. A quadcopter no bigger than a dinner plate creeps along the bottom of the gully, 3 feet off the mud. A hair-thin glass fiber unspooling behind it like a fishing line. Above the tree line, 40 meters away, 2 parabolic dishes the size of satellite receivers sweep the sky. They belong to a Krasukha-4 electronic warfare complex, a Russian system worth an estimated $150 million, built to blind and deafen exactly this kind of aircraft. The dishes never move toward the drone. They can't hear it. It isn't listening to any signal they could jam. 90 seconds after launch, the operator centers his crosshair on a generator trailer parked behind the mast. He pulls the trigger. The image goes white, then black. What you just watched is the end of a story that took 3 weeks to build and less than 2 minutes to finish. A machine engineered to make Ukrainian drones useless got taken apart by one. The reason has almost nothing to do with luck, and almost everything to do with a decision that Russian planners made when they parked that Krasukha where they did. By the end of this video, you'll know why a system that can jam GPS, radar, and radio links across 300 kilometers never saw the one threat it couldn't touch. You'll know who flew it, how close the mission came to falling apart twice, and what happened to that stretch of front line in the weeks after the smoke cleared. Start with what a Krasukha-4 actually is, because the title alone doesn't explain why Russian crews trusted it so much. It's built by Kret, Russia's state radio electronics concern, mounted on an 8-wheeled Kamaz 6350 chassis, so it can move with an armored column instead of trailing behind it. 2 dish antennas, one for jamming airborne radar, one for suppressing satellite and drone control links. Effective range against reconnaissance drones, reported out to 300 kilometers under ideal conditions, though frontline performance runs shorter. A crew of 3 to 4 technicians works inside the cab, reading intercepted frequencies off a bank of monitors and steering the dishes toward whatever's transmitting. Russia doesn't build many of these. Estimates place the total fleet somewhere under 2 dozen. Each one gets assigned to a sector commander who treats it like an air defense radar, something to protect at all costs, because losing it means losing eyes on an entire stretch of sky. Crew rotations on this particular complex ran 12-hour shifts, according to intercepted logistics traffic reviewed after the strike. The senior systems operator, identified only by call sign in that traffic, had reportedly logged over 4 months on this single vehicle, longer than most EW crews stay with one unit before rotating to refit. That kind of tenure builds exactly the confidence this story turns on. A crew that had watched their equipment defeat dozens of Ukrainian drones over 4 months had no operational reason to suspect the next threat wouldn't behave like all the ones before it. The one near Kreminna had been doing exactly what it was designed to do since mid-February 2026. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones flying that sector reported signal loss, video static, and outright crashes before they ever crossed the front line. A quadcopter meant to scout Russian positions along the Zarabets River tree belt would climb to altitude, lose its control link at roughly 4 kilometers out, and either return on autopilot or simply drop. Ukrainian officers in the sector logged at least 11 drones lost to suspected jamming in a 19-day span. Reconnaissance flights that used to take 20 minutes started taking 3 attempts and 2 hours. Artillery spotters went blind on a section of front where Russian resupply columns had been moving freely for weeks. One battery commander in the sector, speaking to a Ukrainian military journalist embedded with the 60th days after the strike, described the 3 weeks before it as the worst stretch of his deployment. Guns ready, coordinates confirmed the night before, and then a scout drone lost to static 20 minutes into a mission, over and over, while Russian trucks rolled past on thermal that nobody could relay in time to act on. He said the unit had started calling that stretch of road the free lane, because for 3 weeks it functioned as one. That's the surface story. A single Russian vehicle, hidden in a tree line, holding an entire Ukrainian brigade's drone program hostage. The unit assigned to break that hostage situation was a strike drone company inside Ukraine's 60th Separate Mechanized Brigade, a group that had spent the previous winter building out fiber-optic FPV capability specifically because radio jamming had become the single biggest killer of their reconnaissance assets. Their internal name for the fiber-optic detachment, Rarog, after the Slavic fire spirit associated with hearth and war. Their pilot for this mission went by the call sign Sick Owl, 26 years old, night vision specialist, 11 months flying strike drones along the Kreminna axis. Fiber-optic FPV is a strange piece of engineering to look at up close. Instead of a radio link between controller and aircraft, the drone trails a spool of glass fiber behind it, sometimes 10 or 12 kilometers of it, thinner than a human hair, feeding video and control signals down a physical wire instead of through the air. No radio emission for a Krasukha to detect, no frequency to jam. The trade-off is fragility. Snag the fiber on a branch or a fence post, and the drone goes dead in the air. Cost per unit, somewhere around $600 to $900, depending on the frame and warhead. Against a $150 million jamming complex, that's a cost ratio north of 150,000 to 1. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. If fiber-optic drones already beat Russian jamming, why did it take 3 weeks to hit this specific target? The Krasukha wasn't the problem. Finding a flight path the Krasukha's crew couldn't watch was. The mast sat on a low rise inside a tree line, giving its operators a clear sightline over open fields in every direction, except one. A drainage ditch running southeast, cut 2 meters deep by decades of runoff, screened on both sides by scrub brush that Russian troops had never bothered clearing. Ukrainian reconnaissance had flagged that ditch back in January as a dead zone in the position's visual coverage. Nobody had a drone that could survive the trip down it, because fiber spools that long hadn't reached frontline units yet. The first obstacle came before the mission even had a target. 6 units spent 3 weeks watching the position, through long-range thermal optics mounted on a Mavic flying well outside jamming range, trying to confirm the Krasukha hadn't relocated. Russian EW crews rotate positions every 5 to 10 days, specifically to defeat this kind of pattern of life tracking. Twice the position went dark for 48 hours, and the team assumed it had moved for good. Twice it came back, apparently because the tree line offered better concealment than anywhere else in a 2-kilometer radius. The unit's solution was patience. They didn't feel like they had. Keep watching, log every reappearance, and wait for a fiber spool long enough to cover the ditch's full 4-kilometer approach. That spool arrived on March 4th. 5 days later, at 04:58, 6 team moved a folding launch platform into a shell crater 900 meters from the ditch entrance and started feeding fiber. I spent a while going through the geolocation write-up. A Ukrainian OSINT analyst posted after this footage surfaced, and one detail kept nagging at me. The launch point sat inside what should have been overlapping coverage from a second Russian asset nobody had mentioned yet. Roughly 400 meters east of the Krasukha's mast, a Pantsir S-1 air defense system sat parked under camouflage netting, its own radar built to track aircraft, cruise missiles, and larger drones at altitude. On paper, that's 2 separate systems covering 2 separate threat categories: radar for airspace and jamming for control links, layered so nothing gets through both. In practice, a foot-tall quadcopter hugging the floor of a drainage ditch flew directly underneath the Pantsir's minimum engagement altitude and inside the one visual gap the Krasukha's dishes couldn't sweep. 2 multi-million-dollar systems, parked 400 meters apart, and neither one's coverage touched the ground 3 meters below their own antennas. That's the vulnerability this whole story turns on. Not a technical flaw in the Krasukha's jamming, which by every account still works exactly as advertised against radio-linked drones. A geometry problem. Elevated sensors built to watch the sky have a blind spot directly beneath them, and Russian EW doctrine never adjusted for an enemy that could fly through it on a wire instead of a signal. Verifying that geometry wasn't a one-afternoon job. The analyst who published the geolocation write-up cross-referenced 3 separate sources before he'd commit to the Pantsir's exact position. A Sentinel-2 satellite pass from 4 days before the strike, a partially obscured frame from the strike footage itself, where camouflage netting briefly caught the wind, and an older piece of geolocated footage from a different unit's drone, filmed the previous November, that happened to catch the same tree line from a different angle. Only when all 3 lined up on the same 8-meter patch of ground did he publish the 400-meter figure. He noted afterward that the margin for error in that kind of triangulation is usually plus or minus 15 meters, tight enough to prove the blind spot existed, not tight enough to have called the shot himself in real time. That distinction is the whole reason a pilot has to fly the last 100 meters on instinct rather than on a map. Sick flew low from the first second, keeping the drone's altitude under a meter, letting the ditch walls do the concealment work the fiber cable was already doing electronically. Video from the cockpit feed, released alongside geolocated wreckage photos in early June, shows scrub brush blurring past on both sides, the horizon line jumping every time the drone crested a rut in the ditch floor. At the 40-second mark, the fiber caught on something. The feed froze for just under 2 seconds, long enough for the operator's second-in-command, watching over Sick's shoulder, to say later that he thought the mission was over. Whatever the fiber snagged on gave way rather than snapping outright. Sick didn't stop the aircraft, didn't back it up to clear the line. He held throttle steady, and the drone pulled through. Small thing. If the fiber had held taut instead of slipping, the run ends there, in a ditch, 3 kilometers short of the target. And this video doesn't exist. At 70 seconds, the ditch shallowed out, and the drone climbed to clear a fence line. The one moment in the entire flight where it was theoretically visible above the tree canopy, to anyone looking in exactly the right direction, at exactly the right second. Nobody was. The Krasukha's dishes were oriented northwest, still sweeping for radio emissions from a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone flying a deliberate decoy pattern 8 kilometers away, launched by a second crew, specifically to keep Russian operators' attention pointed somewhere else. That decoy detail matters more than it sounds. Without it, an alert operator glancing away from his jamming console at the wrong instant might have caught a half-second silhouette crossing the fence line. 2 separate teams, 2 separate aircraft, 1 4-minute window. If the decoy drone had lost its own link early, or if its operator had misjudged the timing by even 90 seconds, Sick would have crossed that fence line under a Krasukha crew paying full attention to the empty sky above it instead of to a decoy pattern to the northwest. At 82 seconds, the tree line. Generator trailer visible in frame. A boxy shape parked 20 meters behind the mast, cabling running from it toward the base of both antennas. This is the detail that took analysts weeks to nail down after the footage surfaced. Krasukha-4 complexes don't run their radar, and jamming arrays off internal batteries during extended operations. They run off a dedicated diesel generator, because sustained high-power jamming draws more current than the vehicle's own systems can sustain for more than a few hours at a stretch. Take out the generator, and the dishes go dark whether or not the dishes themselves took a scratch. Sick didn't aim for the antennas. He aimed for the box that kept them alive. At 90 seconds, impact. The warhead, a repurposed PG-7VL tandem-shaped charge, weighing roughly 1.5 kilograms, detonated against the generator housing. The feed shows a flash, then the characteristic loss of signal that fiber-optic operators call the fiber going quiet. The last half-second of video before the cable itself is destroyed in the blast, and the picture simply stops. Secondary footage, captured by a second Ukrainian drone loitering at altitude well outside the Krasukha's now-dead jamming envelope, shows what happened over the next 4 minutes. black smoke climbing through the tree-line canopy. No secondary detonation from the antennas themselves, which survived the strike physically intact, but useless without power. Russian personnel visible on thermal, moving away from the position rather than toward the fire, which Ukrainian analysts read as confirmation that whatever remained inside that generator trailer wasn't something anyone wanted to be near. Ukrainian signals intelligence monitoring the sector's radio traffic that morning picked up fragments of the aftermath in real time. A voice, unidentified, reporting the position's jamming coverage down to a company command post. Then a second transmission 9 minutes later, requesting an evacuation route for technical personnel. Phrased in a way one Ukrainian intercept operator described as noticeably less composed than the routine traffic that unit had produced all month. No casualty figures were confirmed in the intercepted traffic, and Ukrainian assessments deliberately stopped short of claiming any. What the intercepts did confirm was the sector's jamming coverage dropping to zero within minutes of the strike, matching exactly what the drone footage already showed. What strikes me most about this case isn't the strike itself. Cheap drones destroying expensive Russian hardware stopped being a novelty sometime in 2023. What stands out here is how narrow the actual failure was. Not a design flaw in a $150 million system. A 4-meter gap in ground-level coverage that a drainage ditch happened to run through, and a generator trailer that nobody armored because nobody expected anything to reach it. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback in the comments. The Krasukha crew didn't fail because they were careless. Every account of this incident suggests textbook operating discipline, position rotation, camouflage, a Panzer escort, a tree line chosen for exactly the sight lines it provided. They did nearly everything the manual told them to do. The manual itself was written for a war that didn't yet include a $400 drone trailing glass thread through a ditch. That's not a crew failing at their job. That's doctrine losing a race against a battlefield that changed faster than the paperwork could. Put yourself in that generator trailer's shoes for a second. Or rather, in the shoes of whoever was supposed to be watching it. You've got 2 dishes sweeping 300 kilometers of sky, a radar system covering everything that flies, and the one thing that gets you is something crawling along the ground you were standing on top of. What would you have changed, knowing what you know now? Would this have gone differently if the position had rotated on schedule, instead of staying 5 extra days in a spot Ukrainian recon had already mapped? Comment below. Ukrainian officers in the sector believe the answer is yes. The immediate aftermath moved faster than the mission that caused it. Within 6 hours, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones were flying the Kreminna sector at altitudes and ranges that had been impossible for the previous 3 weeks. A brigade-level intelligence summary logged 0 jamming incidents in the 48 hours following the strike, compared to an average of 1 every day and a half over the prior 3 weeks. That silence didn't last. Russian units in the sector reportedly moved a second electronic warfare asset, believed to be an older Lear-3 complex, into a rear position within 9 days, restoring partial coverage, but at a noticeably reduced range. Ukrainian pilots described the difference as flying under a leaky roof instead of a solid one. Intermittent signal loss instead of the near-total blackout the Krasukha had produced. The cost math on this one is almost uncomfortable to say out loud. One Krasukha-4 complex, roughly $150 million including its chassis, radar suite, and jamming hardware. One fiber-optic FPV drone with a repurposed anti-tank warhead, somewhere under $1,000 all in, plus a fiber spool that itself runs a few $100s more. Even accounting for the 3 weeks of reconnaissance flights, decoy sorties, and personnel hours that went into planning the strike, nothing about this exchange comes close to balancing in Russia's favor. And this wasn't the last time that ditch got used. Ukrainian units in the sector confirmed a second fiber-optic strike along a nearly identical approach route 5 weeks later, this time against a resupply truck that Russian planners had routed along the same tree-lined field the Krasukha had once watched over. Six team didn't get much time to enjoy the result. 2 weeks after the Krasukha strike, the same drainage ditch that had shielded their approach became a known vulnerability the moment Russian engineers realized what happened there. Combat engineers cleared the scrub brush along a 600-meter stretch and laid a fresh minefield across the ditch floor, closing the exact route Sikh had flown. The team's next mission in the sector had to find an entirely new blind spot, because the old one no longer existed. That's the trade this kind of warfare runs on. Every exploited gap gets closed the moment it's used, which means every strike like this one is a single-use key. It works exactly once before the door gets rebuilt. One detail that stuck with me from the analyst write-up: nobody on the Ukrainian side celebrated this as a permanent win. The internal assessment attached to the strike report described it as buying 2 to 3 weeks of degraded Russian jamming in one sector, not eliminating Russian electronic warfare capability along the front. War at this scale doesn't work in knockout blows. It works in windows, and this was one window, priced at under $1,000, that stayed open just long enough to matter. We cut a detail from this story for length. There's an unconfirmed account, still being geolocated, of a third Krasukha-class system reportedly withdrawn from a different sector entirely, after commanders there grew worried about the same ditch and fiber tactic being repeated. If that holds up, comment more below and we'll cover it once the footage clears verification. So, to close the loop, this video opened. A system built to make Ukrainian drones blind, deaf, and useless got taken apart by a drone that never needed to see, hear, or transmit anything the Krasukha could detect in the first place. 3 weeks of patient reconnaissance, a decoy flight timed to the second, a fiber cable that slipped instead of snapped at exactly the wrong moment, and a 4-meter gap in a drainage ditch that nobody had bothered to mine until it was already too late. 90 seconds, 1 FPV run, and a $150 million radar and jamming complex went dark for good. If you want to understand how the rest of the front is adapting to fiber-optic drones, we've got a breakdown of Russia's own fiber-optic countermeasures program coming up next, including the mesh net defenses now appearing outside Russian command posts. Subscribe if you want the full picture of how this war keeps rewriting its own rules every few months, because the next system that looked untouchable 6 months ago is already being reconsidered right now.